Hello, and welcome to the lore of Braunhaven. Today we're going to talk about some simple ways of altering the rules on the fly, or really rather, analyzing your game and seeing where the problems are lying. And this video came about because in the last 2 weeks, I've seen a number of issues come up where at least 3 times in the last 2 weeks I've seen people say that Castles and Crusades is too punishing, and that more often than not your players are going to fail on their checks, and it doesn't need to be that way. If you're running into that, I'm going to, and a lot of people are not going to like hearing this, but I'm going to just flat out and say it. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. If that's what you're running into, you're both a bad castle keeper and maybe a little lazy because you're not doing what you're supposed to do. So getting into the heart of this is that the first thing that you need to think about is that there is no such thing as running the game rules as written for a Castles and Crusades game. The game system is designed to be malleable. You can adjust it to fit how you want your game to run. If you're not doing that, then you're playing incorrectly and you're running the game wrong. And I'm sorry that you don't like to hear that. Invariably, I have heard all of these complaints come from people on X that are from the OSR crowd, and this is the kind of thing that you expect to hear from people from the OSR crowd. It's really, and I've said this before, I will say it again, it's really unfortunate that Castles and Crusades has got lumped in with the OSR crowd, because the reality is that Castles and Crusades mechanics have all of the hallmarks of a modern role-playing game. They have everything. Uh, my hat is tipped to Davis and Stephen Chenault, and all of the developers from Castles and Crusades, because evidently they either had a time machine and could see forward in time to our present day back in 2004, or they are just ultimately they're just geniuses, and maybe I honestly would lean closer in that direction. But it has all the hallmarks of a modern RPG. Um, there's no reason that your players should be failing all the time, and it is in all 3 of the books on how to fix this problem. And it doesn't seem like these people that are complaining about it are doing that. So the first thing that you will see is in the player's handbook, and it is in the section with an iron thumb, the rules. And that very first sentence, whenever the style, theme, setting, plot of the game, the castle keeper should be willing to adjust the game's mechanics when necessary. So here, right here, the very first sentence of this paragraph is telling you there's no such thing as rules as written. You need to adjust the rules to make them work for your characters. If your players are consistently failing, even for a new castle keeper, and this is especially important, if you've never run an RPG before, pay attention to this, because over the course of about 1 or 2 game sessions, you will start to see that your players are either satisfactorily succeeding, and that doesn't mean that they succeed every time, contrary to what my wife believes. It means that they should be succeeding probably about 45 to 50% of the time. And this is not including, the bad dice rolls. I had a player last weekend. She swapped out her D20 5 times, and she could not roll above an 8 the entire time. She was just rolling poorly that day, and it's a good thing she wasn't in a casino, because her kids wouldn't have a college fund anymore. So if they are not hitting, at least 45%, and they're rolling well, then the onus of the problem is that you are not adjusting for that. Now, Castles and Crusades, you have the challenge class. And the challenge class is equal to your challenge base, which is either 12 for a primary attribute or 18 for a secondary attribute, plus the challenge level. It states that challenge levels 1 through 5 are considered easy. I don't necessarily know that I think you can break that down further. I don't necessarily know that I agree with a blanket statement of 1 through 5 as being easy. So when a character makes the roll, let's say it's a primary, they're starting with a base of 12, they add their level, let's say their first level, so now it's 13, or they have a +1 to that roll for their level, and then they have the challenge, or I'm sorry, the attribute modifier. Let's say it's a first level rogue who is picking a lock. So he's got a dexterity with a +1. 1 + 1 is 2. They get a +2 to their dice roll. The challenge base, let's say that it's he's level 1. So why are you putting challenge level 5 locks if you need him to get into that door? Because that's going to now make him need to roll a 17 or better, and at first level, with only a +2 on his dice roll, means he has to roll a 15 or better. That it's unlikely he's going to be able to do that. So you, as the castle keeper, should not be doing that. You should be saying, well, it's a challenge level 2 lock. Okay, well now he only has to get a 14 or better. With a +2, that's possibly more doable. But the challenge level that you as the castle keeper add to this is completely modifiable. You can even make it 0. And in some cases, you can even put negative numbers in to allow them to succeed occasionally. Is that cheating? No. Is it fudging? No. You're not fudging the dice. You are making the adventure appropriate to their level. And really that is what I have found challenge level to be, is that it needs to be adjusted to be more appropriate to their level. And every challenge keeper should be doing this. It doesn't matter if you are running a game that is a pre-printed adventure. I've written several of them, and I always put in the Castles and Crusades adventures, I always put the cast or the challenge level for whatever skill is needed. That is not a hard-coded thing. You ultimately are the master of your game, and you can adjust that. If I wrote down that a tracking challenge level of 5 is required, and you have a bunch of first-level characters that are attempting to tackle that, a challenge level of 5 is likely going to be far too high. You can change that and bring it down to a challenge level of 2. Now, and I can already hear the crowd from the OSR crowd from X. I can hear them in the back of my mind say, "Well, yeah, but what about saving throws?" Well, you can change that too. What about combat rolls? You can change that too. And an example, so when you look at in the Castle Keeper's Guide, there are variant check methods. I've heard a bunch of random percentages thrown around. I heard this one guy on X saying that the way the system is currently designed is that even a character with a prime has less than a 40% chance. No, he doesn't. He has a 45% chance. It's written right here. It's in the CKG. You can alter this too. It doesn't have to be a challenge-based 12, challenge-based 18. You could use the first variant where everything is an 18, and if the character has a primary, they just add +6 to the roll. It comes out the same percentage-wise. I have found that I don't particularly like that too much. On the alternate page, we have another method, and this shows what the various this chart shows the various percentage-based chance if you alter what the challenge base means. So you can change maybe for your game, if you're not seeing a satisfactory enough chance of success, you can change what the prime challenge base is. Instead of 12, make it 10. That now gives them a 60% chance of success. You can make their secondary skills 12. I would recommend for secondary skills going a little bit higher. I would go 14 rather than 18 if that were me. I don't think that a secondary skill should have as high as of a chance as 50%. Now, I had a friend that I used to play games with, and he had this ridiculous assumption. He said at the time we were playing a percentage rule system that we had come up with for Mech Warrior. And base skills, all of their Mech Warriors had, if they were Inner Sphere, they had 40% chance for piloting and gunnery. If they were clans, they had 45, and for both of those. And he would always say, "Well, that's ridiculous because that means that if in real life my driving skill, that means that every time I drove my car, I'd have a 40 only a 40% chance of succeeding." No, that's not what it means. So, taking his ridiculous analogy and saying, okay, so you're going to get in your car and you're going to drive to the corner market to get a gallon of milk. That does not require a skill roll. If you are driving the speed limit and following the rules of the road, there is no need for anybody to require you to make a drive check to drive the 6 blocks to get to the corner store. Where that skill comes in is if something extraordinary happens. You drive out, when you pull out of your neighborhood and you're driving to the corner store, suddenly there's a car chasing you, the driver has road rage, they're trying to run you off the road, and they're firing a handgun at you. Now you need to make a drive check. And the sad fact of the matter is that in reality, he would have more than likely a much lower chance of success than the 40%. He would probably have 20, I would guess probably more 15% chance of success. He's only Mario Andretti in his own mind. So you only need to call for a skill check when it's something extraordinary. I mean, if your characters are just walking down the street of a town, they don't need to make a skill check in order to see the market stall next to them that is selling fruit. It's nothing. They're selling fruit. If there was something extraordinary about the cart, you might call for a wisdom check so that they could notice something that is being sold. But if it's just a normal cart, you don't need to make a roll. They don't have to roll for the most mundane of things. So you can alter the challenge base and increase your character's chance of success. And for the new castle keepers that are out there, after probably 1 or 2 sessions, if you pay attention and see how often your characters or your player characters are succeeding or failing, you can adjust. I would probably give it about 2 sessions because again, you're going to have a lot of bad rolls. Out of 6 players, invariably there's that one person that just has no luck. So bad rolls excluded. Look at how many times they are rolling decently. If they're consistently rolling 10, 12, 13 on a d20 and still failing, the problem isn't with the mechanics of the system, it's that you haven't altered the system to match the level of your player characters. And so this is how you do that. Now, as far as like saving throws and even combat, there is dragon rules. So in Castles and Crusades, when a dragon makes an attack, for instance, it does not, unlike other creatures, it doesn't add its full level or hit dice to its die roll. Instead, it adds 1/2 of it. So there's no reason that you can't add this in other places. Let's say that your 3rd level players or 3rd level player characters are attacking an ogre who is going to be just slightly above them at 3rd level. You don't have to add all of his level in. You could say, well, he's fourth level, I'm gonna only add in 2 to his attack roll, so I'm not punishing my players as badly. Or on his saving throws, instead of giving him a +4 uh, to his saving throws, I believe he is physical, which would mean his challenge base is 12. A +4 to that is sometimes going to be pretty high on physical rolls. On his secondary would be 18. Anything that would be mental would be 18. A +4 is still probably a bit high. You can cut that in half. A +2 is much more believable for something like an ogre. So you can adjust this stuff on the fly, and um, either adjust it on the fly to make the game more enjoyable for your player characters, because you're never looking for a total party kill. You don't want to kill off all your player characters, because that seems like a waste of time to me. You just destroyed your entire campaign because you didn't alter the rules. The other thing that you can do is you can set some of these as a permanent house rule. Going back to the checks and methods, you can set a house rule for your table that says, okay, instead of primaries having a challenge base of 12, we're going to make it a challenge base of 10. And instead of secondaries having a challenge base of 18, we're going to give it a challenge base of 14, and that's the rule going forward. And that way your players know they don't have to look it up or ask you each and every time. They know going forward that it's 10 and 14 rather than 12 and 18. That's all you have to do, and you can make your game run a lot smoother, and your player characters will succeed more often. Now, another thing that I see brought up, and this is a constant with the OSR on X, is whether or not your campaigns have a plot. And to listen to these guys state it, that your game should never have a plot, that it should just be a hex map where the characters randomly roll for encounters, and whether or not there is a dungeon or a feature somewhere in a particular hex, and that the plot will somehow, just miraculously appear as the characters do this. This is probably the laziest game mastering technique I've seen. This is essentially the game master sitting there with a bunch of tables, randomly rolling for every single item. And what it leads to, and I found this with a lot of OSR games, I found this particularly with Old School Essentials, and it goes back to the original Basic and Expert box sets of Dungeons and Dragons back in the 70s and 80s, is that it really, if you take an old adventure, Borderland or Keep on the Borderlands is a great example. I think many of us cut our teeth on that. It was great fun, but it was really lean on plot. It was written in High Gygaxian, so being 6 or 7 years old and trying to decipher what it is that he's trying to say was nigh impossible. A lot of it was written with the tongue firmly planted in cheek, to as inside jokes between him and the rest of his table, and or inside jokes that only an adult would know. It was near impossible to glean, and the plot of Keep on the Borderlands, despite all of its pages, could be boiled down in about 3 sentences, and it was thin at best. And those OSR games, and the modern, those old games and the modern OSR games, the biggest issue that I find with them is that they move the characters from one encounter to the next. Plot and role play, that pillar of the 3 pillars is really, really short. It's very small. Versus the opposite, you have 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, where the roleplay pillar is gargantuan, next to the combat pillar, and the exploration pillar is really, really, really small. So the most the best ideal that you can get for a game, if you are setting one up, is that you have to have a plot, and your plot, it doesn't have to be an entire book. The If you can write 2 or 3 paragraphs, you can have a decent plot that the characters can grab onto and move forward, because they need to have clear goals rather than randomly walking around the countryside looking for something to do, and basically putting the onus of creating the plot on your players. That's not their job. They showed up to play a game. There should be some direction that you, as the castle keeper, that is your job to do, is to give them some direction, even if it's just to drop hints in the direction you want to go. That's your job. And you can't drop hints if you don't have a plot for them to follow. You would just be randomly throwing things out there and seeing what sticks, which is what a lot of the OSR do. And this is one reason why it is often called mudcore, because the characters randomly run in at first level, randomly find a dragon's lair, and they are killed. And so now everybody has to roll up new characters, and the players are perpetually stuck between levels 1 and 3 because their characters keep dying because they keep running into things that are far too high for them to deal with. And if it's something like a dragon, running away isn't going to help you. The dragon can outpace you. Your lunch once that happens. So you need to have at least the formation. If anything, in your head, you have to have a formation of a plot. Something that the players can grab onto, and a clear set of goals that they can follow in order for the completion of that leg of the adventure, or to proceed with the rest of the campaign, what have you. Don't do. I mean, if your player characters are really into wargaming and they enjoy the whole mudcore experience, then bonus to you for providing that. Now, in the first edition of Braunhaven, I really leaned in hard with old school essentials, and leaned in that direction. The plots were thin for each adventure book, which also doubled as a source book. The plots were thin. There was just enough there for the players to grab onto and move forward, but the bulk of those experiences came from what the players made as assumptions. And in some cases, those assumptions were good enough that they got written into the game itself. One example is the Order of the Martyr for the clerics. That was good enough that it kind of made its way in permanently, and is canon for Braunhaven. But there were other ones. One such, there was a running joke at the table. They had a magic mirror that when you stared into the mirror, you could open up a portal to a distant location that you had already been to, and step through the portal, and you could do this 3 times a day. And one of the running jokes was that they would herd some of these monsters into the mirror and send them back to the Imperial port. And after about the 4th time, they'd done this with a number of undead, because one of their necromancer would use control undead, and so they sent a banshee, they sent some zombies. And after about the 3rd or 4th time of doing this, the running joke was, the Imperial Port's now just infested with undead, and we're going to have to go back and clear that out sooner or later, or just wait until the problem resolves itself. And so there was this running joke. And so that never stuck. I wasn't going to make it canon that now, after the following, with the 2nd edition of Braunhaven coming out with the Braunhaven Player's Guide, I was not going to make the Imperial Port be infested with undead because the previous player characters had just kept dumping them there. That wasn't going to stick. So you end up with all of these bits and pieces if you do it that way, and some of them can be rewarding, and others are questionable. your mileage will vary, but I really highly think that you need to have a you need to have at least the bare bones of a plot, and I don't mean like a thin plot. I mean 2, 3 paragraphs to say this is why they're here, this is what they're doing, and or what they are should be doing, or what they are offered. Now, can they go off course and say no, we're not going to do that? Of course they can, and then you're left back with the previous version of saying, well, here's a hex map. In the second edition adventures that I'm writing, um, I am including more of a plot. Um, that something that they there's a story to be told here that they can pick out as they follow along or as they make their checks. There's plenty of room for assumption, and I'm always trying to include a large hex map that there are other things to explore. So you've got your exploration pillar, you've got your role play pillar, because there are a lot of things in here for role play events. There is, of course, the combat pillar. There are plenty of opportunities for combat, and in all of these cases, I'm trying to keep it near their level. That way, you're not running into a situation where, oh, we're down in the sewers and now we suddenly have to fight a dragon. There are a couple of instances of things like that. For instance, this is a rough draft of the Werewolves of London that is forthcoming. And there is an instance, for example, in there where they're down in the sewers. There is an Audivore down there. And if this adventure is designed for levels 1 through 3, I believe an Audivore is level 6. So that can be quite challenging. Not everything's meant for them to tackle. If they run away, an Audivore is probably not going to... One, it's probably not going to fit through the narrow channels of a sewer system. And two, it's not going to leave its pile of offal and everything else to follow them. It might follow them a little bit, but then it's going to lose interest and go back to its pile of dung. And so, not everything's meant to be tackled head on, and your players should really learn. And this is an example of teaching them that not everything needs to be dealt with. They can run away, and that is highly recommended. Now, of course, I think it has paralysis. So, I mean, if 1 or 2 of them get paralyzed, lesson learned. But that, of course, that is a possibility in any combat. So I try to keep the level as close to what the player characters are for the adventure. To make it particularly like a boss monster, I might go 1 level or 2 levels higher. If there's a really big bad like the Audivore in this case, I might go a full 3 levels higher. But generally, for the adventure, I try to keep the level of the monsters around the same level. NPCs can be all over the place. If they're not going to be they're not meant to be getting into combat with, for instance, Sir Roger Hollenverd, who's like a level 14 knight. He's sitting in when they meet him, he is sitting in his private chambers at a social club, and he's sipping pumpkin brandy. They're not meant to draw their swords and get into a fight with him. Even unarmed, he's probably going to mop the floor with the entire party at level 14, using nothing but a chair and a broken decanter of brandy. So, your NPC characters can range wildly on what their level is going to be, because they're not meant for combat. They are there to either usually to impart information to the characters, or to sometimes be a other kind of barrier to the characters, something that they have to bypass, and something that drawing their sword is not going to solve the situation. So NPCs can range all over the place, but monsters I try to keep as close to the level of the party. And this goes back to, oh, my party is constantly failing. Well, that's because your monster, or my party members are constantly dying. That's because the monsters are too high a level. yeah, if you succeed on killing that monster, they're going to get a whole bunch of XP. But the likelihood of that happening when it's 6 to 8 levels higher than they are is very unlikely. And so you, as the castle keeper, need to adjust those levels. An example with the Audivore, if sixth level, if you feel that it's too high, and possibly it is, I might go back and change it myself. But this is in rough draft form. Um, if that's too high for you, you can cut its level and lower its hit dice and make it just as much of being an Audivore. It doesn't have to be level 6. You could say, I'm going to make it level 3, cut its hit dice in half, re-roll its hit points, or take the average of those 3 hit dice and throw it back in the dungeon. And now it's more in line with what the characters would be able to tackle. So the crux of this is that if you don't get to go out and say that Castles and Crusades system is too punishing for the players, because the only one that's punishing your players is you as the castle keeper, because you haven't done your due diligence in going in and tweaking the rules to make it fit for your group or for that group's level. And so I hate to tell it to you, but you need to do a little bit more work on your castle keeping. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.